Hey guys, thanks for joining me this week for chapter 5 of The Biggest Story. Last week was chapter 4, and it was all about, we talked about how the Israelites went to Egypt, how they were actually taken to Egypt as slaves and why they were there. And then we talked about how Moses came and raised them and got them freed from slavery. And that was where we left off. So we talked about how they got to Egypt, kind of why they were there, and then how Moses was able to get them out. So now we're going to go into chapter 5. So this one has the 10 Commandments. There's a bird with like a wreath, like an olive branch around it. There is a animal of some sort and a fire. So let's see what this chapter is all about. This is chapter 5 of The Biggest Story. It was a very good thing God was always rescuing his people, because it seemed that no matter how many times God saved his people, the Israelites were never quite safe from themselves. See, after God delivered his people from Egypt, he gave them a lot of commandments. This wasn't to punish them, but to help them and protect them. And you might hear people say sometimes that God gave us too many rules because he wanted to punish us. But I think just like your parents and your teachers, rules are a good thing, right? Rules, I tell my boys, rules are to keep you from getting hurt, and they're to protect you, and it's because I love you. So it's the same reason God gives us commandments and rules, because he wants to protect us in our hearts, and he wants us to have a good life. So they were good commandments, and if they obeyed the commandments, God's people would be blessed. There would be food and children and long life and protection and a new home. It would be just like they were in paradise again. Paradise is the garden, remember? That's where God wanted to lead them all along, back to the garden. But if they didn't obey, there would be curses, just like the ones that fell on Adam and Eve and the serpent. So this shows what life would be like if they lived within the commandments, and this shows what life would look like if they lived outside of the commandments. As you might have guessed, the people didn't do so well obeying God's commands. And after Moses and his helper Joshua died, they disobeyed even more. They ignored the most important commands, and when they did work hard at some rules, like getting their sacrifices right, they didn't really obey those rules from their heart. They just checked them off their list and forgot about the more important commands. Sorry about the car, y'all. So this shows somebody writing. This could have been one of the prophets that was writing one of the scrolls for the Bible. I'm trying to see where that car is. Oh, there it goes. Okay. Not that God's people deserved it, but God finally gave them their promised land. God did the work to get them in, but God's people didn't do the work to drive everyone else out. This caused a lot of trouble for the Israelites. So God made a way for the Israelites to get in, and you read that. He made a way for them to get into the land, but they were supposed to follow his instructions and get the other people out, and they didn't do that, and that made life really hard. They constantly had enemies to fight, and worse, they constantly had to fight the temptation to be just like their enemies. Sometimes things would go well for Israel, but when they had a good leader and when they obeyed. But most often, things went poorly. So you see them right here fighting each other. And then over here, this is what we call an idol. So when you hear in the Bible that they made idols to worship, they made a picture or a statue of a cow, and they were worshiping that instead of worshiping God. Okay, this is the cool page. You ready? God gave the Israelites rules, but they didn't follow the rules. God made his dwelling among them, but they didn't act like they wanted him to stick around. God sent prophets, but Israel didn't listen. God provided priests, but the priests don't know how to be holy. Later, God gave them kings, but the kings were a royal pain. Israel was a mess. Of course, God still had his promises to keep, but most days it was hard to imagine how anyone could save these stubborn people. It would have been even harder to imagine how the promised man could come from among these people. So it's saying that God still has all of these promises that he's made to them to keep, but it's also saying we know that the Savior is going to come from these people. And how is the Savior going to come from these stubborn people that don't listen to God and don't obey him? And that is where we're going to leave off with chapter 6. So I hope y'all enjoyed chapter 5 of this book. I've enjoyed reading it with y'all every week. I'm sorry that this was a day late, but I hope that y'all enjoy it.